Hollywood loves its stars until it doesn't. Beneath the glittering lights and champagne smiles lies a ruthless machine that can turn admiration into exile overnight. Some of the biggest names once adored by millions suddenly found themselves erased from the screen, their fame replaced by silence, scandal, or shame. Behind every red carpet, there's a blacklist whispered about, denied publicly, but very real. Actors who challenged power, broke the illusion, or simply fell out of favor learned the same brutal truth. In Hollywood, loyalty ends where profit begins. But what really happens when fame fades and the industry turns its back? Who decides which legends deserve redemption and which are buried in oblivion? Today, we uncover the 20 most famous actors Hollywood has blacklisted, silenced, or quietly erased, and the reasons why will change how you see your favorite stars forever. 20. Katherine Heigl. She was once Hollywood's golden girl, the radiant star of Grey's Anatomy, Knocked Up, and 27 Dresses. Katherine Heigl had what every young actress dreamed of: beauty that felt effortless, timing that made comedy sparkle, and a confidence that filled every frame. In the early 2000s, she was America's romantic ideal, the woman audiences rooted for and studios depended on. But behind that bright image was a tension Hollywood wasn't ready for. Heigl began speaking her mind about long hours, unfair pay, and creative disrespect, things that others whispered, but never dared to say aloud. When she withdrew her name from Emmy consideration, claiming her Grey's Anatomy scripts didn't deserve it, the industry took it as rebellion, and Hollywood has never loved rebels who don't play its game. Almost overnight, her career froze. Projects were quietly shelved, directors labeled her difficult, and casting agents stopped taking her calls. Her once thriving momentum turned to static, leaving her stranded between fame and exile. Heigl retreated from the spotlight, choosing family life and smaller roles on streaming platforms. While she has found peace, her career never fully recovered from Hollywood's silent punishment. In interviews, she still defends her honesty, insisting she was never difficult, just demanding the respect she deserved. Today, Katherine Heigl stands as both a cautionary tale and a quiet inspiration. Her legacy is complex, a woman punished not for scandal, but for speaking truth in an industry built on silence. She remains proof that in Hollywood, confidence is celebrated on screen, but condemned in real life. 19. Megan Fox. Megan Fox was once the face of Hollywood desire, the star who made the camera tremble. With Transformers and Jennifer's Body, she became an icon overnight, fusing power, rebellion, and impossible beauty. Audiences saw her as a fantasy, but for a brief moment, Megan was more than that. She was the promise of a new kind of female stardom, confident, sarcastic, and unapologetic. That promise unraveled with a few bold words. During interviews, she compared director Michael Bay to a dictator and spoke out about being objectified on set. In an industry ruled by ego and control, her honesty was treated as betrayal. Within weeks, she was dropped from the Transformers franchise, a decision that felt less like casting and more like exile. The tabloids circled, labeling her ungrateful, difficult, even toxic. Hollywood had found its next scapegoat. After her removal, doors that once swung open for her slammed shut. Big-budget scripts disappeared. Studio executives whispered her name only in cautionary tones. She wasn't officially blacklisted. Hollywood rarely uses the word, but she was quietly erased from the mainstream. For years, she became a symbol of what happens when a woman refuses to play nice in a system built on obedience. Megan retreated, rebuilt, and redefined herself. She embraced motherhood, took independent film roles, and began to speak openly about how the industry sexualized her from the start. In interviews, she talked not with bitterness, but clarity about trauma, power, and the illusion of fame. Her relationship with musician Machine Gun Kelly reignited her celebrity, but this time, she controlled the narrative. She became her own brand, not the studio's invention. Today, Megan Fox represents the evolution of Hollywood rebellion. Once branded as The fallen starlet, she has become an emblem of how the industry silences women and how those same women learn to speak louder. Her story proves that even when Hollywood takes your career, it can't take your voice. 18. Armie Hammer. At first, he seemed born for the movies, tall, poised, and carved from the golden mold of classic Hollywood leading men. After The Social Network and Call Me by Your Name, Armie Hammer was everywhere. Critics called him the next great romantic hero, a perfect blend of privilege and precision, a man who made elegance look effortless. Then the fantasy cracked. In early 2021, disturbing allegations began to surface: leaked messages, dark fetishes, accusations of abuse. The internet turned savage, dissecting every detail of his private life until the scandal became spectacle. The studio system, allergic to controversy, ran for cover. Agents dropped him, roles disappeared, and his name became unmentionable in meetings where it once guaranteed money. Hollywood didn't just distance itself, it erased him. He was digitally removed from posters, quietly recast in major films, and edited out of trailers as if he had never existed. The exile was silent, but absolute. No courtroom verdict was needed. Public disgust was enough. In the aftermath, Hammer disappeared from Los Angeles and from fame itself. Reports placed him in the Cayman Islands, selling timeshares, surviving off the remains of a vanished fortune. Occasionally, he surfaced in interviews, defending himself, but the world had already written its ending. His once flawless image had turned into a cultural horror story. Armie Hammer's downfall isn't just about scandal, it's about how fast modern Hollywood burns its idols. His story became a symbol of what happens when the dream factory meets the digital mob. No trial, no redemption, just a clean erasure wrapped in moral outrage. 17. Amber Heard. Amber Heard seemed destined to be Hollywood's next great leading woman. With her sharp beauty and magnetic confidence, she stood out in films like Aquaman and The Rum Diary. She moved easily between red carpets and blockbusters, admired as a rising star who blended intelligence with allure. For a moment, she appeared unstoppable, a symbol of modern success and self-control. Then the illusion shattered. Her marriage to Johnny Depp, once the dream of tabloid fantasy, became the most publicized war in celebrity history. Accusations of violence, manipulation, and lies spilled into the courtroom, turning their private life into global entertainment. Each side weaponized the media, and the internet chose its battlefield. For millions, she became either a survivor or a fraud, nothing in between. Hollywood, allergic to risk, stepped back. Brand deals vanished, studios halted negotiations, and even her role in Aquaman 2 was quietly reduced. The silence was strategic, not moral, a calculation of profit over principle. No official blacklist was announced, but her exile was visible everywhere, in empty interviews, in fan petitions, in the quiet replacement of her name in film promotion. Away from the chaos, Heard retreated to Spain with her daughter, far from the Hollywood glare. There, she has started over, working in small European productions and rebuilding a private life out of the wreckage of public humiliation. She rarely speaks about the trial now, perhaps because every word would only reopen wounds the world refuses to let heal. Amber Heard's story will forever exist at the intersection of fame and fury, a warning about what happens when personal tragedy becomes public currency. Whether villain or victim, she embodies the brutal truth of modern celebrity. In the age of outrage, no one really wins. 16. Brendan Fraser. Brendan Fraser once embodied everything audiences loved about old-fashioned movie heroes: charm without arrogance, strength without cruelty, humor without irony. From The Mummy to George of the Jungle, he ruled the late 90s box office with a warmth that made adventure feel human again. He wasn't just a star, he was the kind of actor people trusted. Then, without warning, he disappeared. Hollywood's doors seemed to close on him quietly. Years later, he revealed the truth that he had been sexually assaulted by a powerful Hollywood executive. When he spoke up, the offers stopped. His body, broken from years of stunts, began to fail him, and depression took hold. The charming hero who had once carried billion-dollar franchises was suddenly left behind in an industry obsessed with image and silence. While the world moved on, Brendan lived in isolation. His once constant smile faded into uncertainty, and rumors of his downfall filled the gossip columns. He didn't fight back with anger. He simply waited, raising his sons, tending to his injuries, and finding dignity in retreat. Hollywood, meanwhile, pretended not to remember him. Then, almost 2 decades later, came the miracle no one expected. The Whale gave him a second life, a raw, painful, breathtaking performance that reminded the world why they loved him in the first place. When he stood on the Oscar stage, tears streaming down his face, it wasn't just a win, it was vindication. Brendan Fraser's legacy is no longer about disappearance, it's about endurance. His story has become a quiet rebellion against the cruelty of fame, a reminder that true talent doesn't fade when the cameras stop rolling. It waits, patiently, for the world to rediscover its heart. 15. Russell Brand. Russell Brand burst into Hollywood like a storm in human form, wild, witty, unfiltered, and fearless. With his performances in Forgetting Sarah Marshall and Get Him to the Greek, he became the embodiment of chaotic charm. He wasn't just an actor, he was an idea, the dangerous mix of intellect and insanity that Hollywood loves until it becomes inconvenient. His accent, his vocabulary, his defiance of decorum made him fascinating in an industry addicted to control. But the man who lived without limits eventually collided with them. His off-screen persona, sex, politics, and provocation began to overshadow the work. When past allegations of sexual assault and manipulation resurfaced years later, the outrage was instantaneous. Networks pulled reruns, studios halted projects, and his name was scrubbed from promotion schedules. The British press led the feeding frenzy, and the Hollywood machine quietly followed. Brand, once the life of the party, became the headline no one wanted to touch. He refused to vanish. Instead, he shifted his voice to independent platforms, podcasts, YouTube, and live speaking tours, turning his exile into a pulpit. There, he attacked the same system that once embraced him, calling out corporate corruption, political hypocrisy, and the illusions of fame. His following grew larger, more devoted, and far beyond Hollywood's reach. Away from the lights, Russell Brand transformed himself. He married, became a father, and devoted his time to spirituality and activism. To some, it was a redemption arc. To others, it was camouflage. Either way, he stopped being a product and became a movement. Russell Brand's legacy is one of contradiction. He is both the outcast and the oracle, a man who lost Hollywood but found something larger control of his own narrative. His story proves that being blacklisted doesn't always end in silence. Sometimes, it becomes the beginning of a louder truth. 14. Rose McGowan. Rose McGowan once represented the fire Hollywood couldn't contain. With her dark glamour and fearless presence, she rose to fame in the late 90s through Scream and Charmed, becoming a face of the era's rebellion, sharp, magnetic, and unapologetically bold. She wasn't molded by the studio system, she challenged it from within. For a time, her name meant danger, beauty, and control, everything Hollywood wanted to sell, but not actually empower. Then came the moment that changed everything. When McGowan spoke out against Harvey Weinstein, she broke one of Hollywood's oldest unwritten rules: never accuse power. Her revelations cracked open the foundation of the film industry and ignited the Me Too movement, but the price she paid was devastating. Overnight, she went from actress to activist, from red carpets to blacklists. Studios stopped calling. Casting directors avoided her name. She wasn't just ignored, she was erased. The media turned her courage into controversy. Talk shows called her unstable. Gossip sites mocked her, and insiders whispered that she had ruined her career. The very industry that had enabled predators now punished the woman who exposed them. Behind the noise, Rose stood her ground, knowing the system's cruelty firsthand, a cruelty that prefers silence over justice. She left Hollywood behind and rebuilt her life in Europe. There, she wrote, directed, and created her own art away from the hands that once controlled her image. She no longer needed studios to validate her existence. In interviews, her tone is calm, almost defiant, like someone who's already survived the worst and come out freer. Rose McGowan's legacy is that of a whistleblower turned warrior. She lost her career but changed the culture. Hollywood may have buried her name in its archives, but her courage became a permanent part of its history, a reminder that sometimes the price of truth is everything you once dreamed of. 13. Mel Gibson. For a time, Mel Gibson was untouchable Hollywood's golden warrior, the rugged face of Lethal Weapon, and the visionary mind behind Braveheart. He didn't just act in blockbusters, he created them. His charisma was lightning in a bottle, his reputation flawless, and his power unmatched. He was the kind of star studios built empires around one of the few who could fill theaters on name alone. Then, the empire collapsed. A series of recordings leaked drunken rants laced with racist, sexist, and anti-Semitic remarks. Overnight, the man who had once symbolized strength became a symbol of hate. The backlash was swift and brutal. His agent dropped him, studios severed ties, and his name disappeared from award circuits and talk shows. Hollywood, once his kingdom, turned to stone around him. For nearly a decade, Mel Gibson wandered in exile. No studio dared to hire him. No magazine would defend him. He directed small films, funded his own projects, and kept out of sight. Each attempt to return met resistance, proof that forgiveness in Hollywood has a price few can afford. Yet behind the isolation, he worked tirelessly, waiting for one more chance to prove he was more than his worst moment. That chance came with Hacksaw Ridge. The film, a masterpiece of faith and courage, earned critical acclaim and 6 Oscar nominations, restoring part of the respect he'd lost. But even in victory, the shadow lingered. Gibson had re-entered Hollywood, but he would never again belong to it. Today, his story divides people genius or disgrace, artist or sinner. Mel Gibson remains proof that in Hollywood, talent can survive exile, but innocence never returns. His legacy is a parable about redemption and ruin, a reminder that no amount of brilliance can outshine the darkness of a public fall. 12. Jim Carrey. For years, Jim Carrey was Hollywood's living spark, the face that could twist, melt, and explode into laughter on command. From Ace Ventura and The Mask to The Truman Show, he didn't just entertain, he transformed comedy into art. His ability to blur the line between absurdity and vulnerability made him one of the most magnetic performers of his generation. At his peak, Jim Carrey was more than famous, he was a phenomenon. But the same mind that made him brilliant also made him restless. As his fame reached its zenith, Carrey began questioning everything: the industry, the illusion of celebrity, even himself. He spoke publicly about depression, spirituality, and the emptiness of Hollywood. His words, though sincere, unsettled an industry built on denial. Producers stopped calling. He was labeled weird, unstable, and too intense. The man who once defined laughter became a mirror that forced Hollywood to see its own hollowness, and it turned away. The headlines shifted from his movies to his philosophy. Interviews became existential monologues about meaning, ego, and the illusion of self. The industry didn't know how to market enlightenment. His absence from major films was quiet but deliberate, a slow erasure disguised as disinterest. In the years that followed, Carrey withdrew into painting and writing. His art, vibrant, angry, spiritual, became a reflection of everything he couldn't say on screen. He spoke less about movies and more about consciousness, often sounding like a man who had seen behind the curtain and chosen not to go back. While audiences still adore him, Hollywood prefers him silent, a relic of an era when comedy dared to be human. Jim Carrey's legacy is one of contradiction, a clown who became a philosopher, a superstar who walked away from the machine that made him. He exposed the cost of endless performance, that in chasing laughter, even the brightest souls can lose their voice. 11. Will Smith. Will Smith was the embodiment of Hollywood's dream, a man who could do it all. From The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air to Men in Black and King Richard, he built a career on charm, discipline, and relentless ambition. He was the face of global entertainment, funny enough to sell blockbusters, serious enough to win Oscars, and clean-cut enough to be a role model. For decades, he maintained what few could: universal love. Then came the night that shattered it. At the 2022 Oscars, in front of millions, he walked onto the stage and slapped comedian Chris Rock. The moment froze in time, a split second that erased 30 years of goodwill. The crowd gasped, the internet exploded, and within hours, Will Smith's legacy became a battlefield of outrage and defense. To some, it was human. To others, unforgivable. Hollywood responded with precision. The Academy banned him for 10 years, and studios put projects on hold. His next films, once guaranteed blockbusters, were suddenly under review. It wasn't just a punishment, it was a pause, a reminder that even the most adored can become disposable when image turns toxic. The industry that had crowned him king quietly pulled the throne away. Away from the cameras, Smith disappeared into reflection. He traveled, meditated, and later spoke about trauma, ego, and emotional control. His return has been cautious: smaller appearances, a few interviews, and a visible shift toward humility. But the perfection that once defined him is gone, replaced by a man trying to rebuild not just his career, but his identity. Will Smith's legacy now lives in duality, brilliance and shame, humanity and mistake. His story is a warning written in real time. Fame may give you power, but one moment of emotion can dismantle an empire. In Hollywood's eyes, redemption is possible, but it never comes without scars. 10. Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey once stood at the pinnacle of modern acting, a chameleon capable of vanishing completely into his roles. His performances in The Usual Suspects, American Beauty, and House of Cards weren't just acclaimed, they were transformative. He exuded control, precision, and quiet menace. To Hollywood, he represented artistic mastery, the perfect combination of intellect and darkness. Then, the illusion collapsed. In 2017, multiple allegations of sexual misconduct surfaced, stretching across decades and involving both colleagues and minors. The shock was immediate and total. Netflix fired him from House of Cards overnight, and Ridley Scott famously reshot All the Money in the World, removing him entirely from a finished film. Within weeks, Spacey's name became radioactive. He vanished from the public eye, replaced by an online echo of outrage. Awards were rescinded, friendships evaporated, and the same magazines that once praised his genius now published his obituary and reputation. Though he denied many accusations, the court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. In Hollywood, guilt is rarely about proof, it's about perception. Years later, as legal cases dissolved or ended in acquittal, Spacey attempted to reappear, giving brief interviews, producing short films, even performing in Europe. But the machine that once adored him had moved on. Hollywood has a short memory for success and a long one for scandal. Kevin Spacey's legacy now exists in a strange vacuum between greatness and disgrace, art and accusation. His fall became the blueprint for modern cancellation: swift, absolute, and irreversible. For an actor who built a career on control, his downfall proved that in Hollywood, no one truly controls how their story ends. 9. Johnny Depp. For decades, Johnny Depp was the heartbeat of Hollywood rebellion. He wasn't just a movie star, he was a cultural phenomenon. From Edward Scissorhands to Pirates of the Caribbean, he built an empire on eccentricity, mystery, and quiet melancholy. No one else could turn strangeness into box office gold like he could. To fans, he was proof that artistry could still survive inside the machinery of fame. Then came the trial that changed everything. His tumultuous relationship with Amber Heard erupted into one of the most public court battles in entertainment history. Allegations of abuse, drug use, and manipulation dominated headlines for years. What had once been gossip became a televised spectacle. Audiences divided, hashtags became verdicts, and suddenly, the actor who once embodied misfit purity became the face of Hollywood's moral confusion. Studios reacted with cold efficiency. Disney distanced itself, removing him from Pirates of the Caribbean. Warner Brothers replaced him in Fantastic Beasts. The industry that had worshipped his eccentricity now saw him as a liability. He wasn't officially banned, but the message was unmistakable. His name no longer sold innocence, only controversy. While Hollywood retreated, his fans refused to let go. Millions rallied behind him, transforming social media into a battleground of loyalty and belief. When the trial verdict favored him, the narrative shifted again from disgrace to redemption. Depp returned to Cannes, standing before thunderous applause, though his eyes revealed a man who'd seen too much of what fame truly costs. Johnny Depp's story is no longer just about acting. It's about endurance, reputation, and the war between truth and perception. His legacy is both damaged and immortal, a reminder that in Hollywood, you can lose everything and still remain unforgettable. Some stars fade, others burn forever, even in darkness. 8. Shia LaBeouf. Shia LaBeouf was never meant to be ordinary. From the moment he appeared on Even Stevens, his chaotic brilliance and raw humor marked him as something rare, a child star who might actually survive the machine. With Transformers, Fury, and Indiana Jones, and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, he ascended to global fame, earning respect for his range and authenticity. Shia wasn't polished, he was real. And that's exactly what made him magnetic. But real life began to overshadow the screen. Arrests, public breakdowns, and accusations of abuse and manipulation began to define his name more than his craft. He arrived at premieres wearing paper bags that read, "I am not famous anymore," turned interviews into performance art, and spoke about trauma, addiction, and faith, with a disarming mix of honesty and confusion. What once looked like genius started to look like collapse. Hollywood, uncomfortable with unpredictability, backed away. Soon, studios stopped calling, and his reputation became a paradox, a man too talented to ignore, but too volatile to trust. Lawsuits and tabloid stories replaced his scripts. His collaborations with independent directors became his only refuge, as the major studios shut their doors. For the first time since childhood, Shia LaBeouf was truly alone. In the quiet that followed, he began rebuilding through therapy, through religion, through art. He spoke openly about redemption, admitting his sins without self-pity. In Padre Pio and small artistic projects, he found a way to act again, not for fame but for salvation. Shia LaBeouf's legacy is both tragic and luminous, the portrait of a man who burned too brightly in a place that punishes authenticity. His story reveals Hollywood's deepest fear, the truth that its greatest artists are often its most broken souls. 7. Cuba Gooding Jr. Cuba Gooding Jr. once embodied the joy of Hollywood itself, magnetic, heartfelt, and impossible not to love. When he shouted, "Show me the money!" in Jerry Maguire, the world cheered with him. That moment won him an Oscar and turned him into one of the most beloved faces in cinema. For a while, Cuba seemed untouchable, a symbol of charm and optimism who could make audiences cry, laugh, and believe. But the spotlight that once adored him eventually became merciless. After a series of box office flops and questionable role choices, his career began to stall. Then came the headlines that destroyed it completely. In the late 2010s, multiple women accused him of sexual misconduct, and his name went from Oscar winner to scandal suspect overnight. The charges multiplied, the tabloids feasted, and the man who once defined celebration became a cautionary headline. Hollywood, ever sensitive to public perception, acted fast. Studios froze him out, agents cut ties, and his presence disappeared from both film and television. The industry didn't need a trial, it needed distance. His charisma, once his greatest weapon, became evidence of guilt in a world that had already moved on. Cuba retreated from the red carpet and the spotlight that had once built him. The courts eventually reduced or dropped some charges, but the damage to his reputation was permanent. He made occasional appearances, often in small productions or theater, but the golden glow of his career never returned. The applause he once commanded had turned into silence. Today, his story reads like a tragedy wrapped in irony. A man who once shouted for the world to show him love now spends his days fighting to be remembered for something other than scandal. Cuba Gooding Jr. stands as a painful reminder of how fast Hollywood can turn its heroes into ghosts, and how redemption, in that world, is rarer than fame itself. Zix. Richard Gere. Richard Gere once defined the word leading man. With his silver hair, steady gaze, and quiet magnetism, he was Hollywood royalty, the heartthrob of Pretty Woman, and an officer and a gentleman. For decades, his name meant romance, sophistication, and box office certainty. He was the kind of actor who didn't need special effects, his presence alone could carry a film. But in a business ruled by money and influence, ideals have a price. Gere's downfall began not with scandal, but with conviction. He spoke openly against China's human rights violations and voiced support for the Dalai Lama and Tibet. At a time when Hollywood was deepening its dependence on the Chinese market, his words became an economic threat. Quietly, the studios turned away. His name disappeared from casting shortlists, and the leading roles once written for him went to younger, safer faces. There was no official statement, no public feud, just silence. Gere later said that directors told him privately they couldn't risk hiring him because of Chinese investors. One of the most recognizable faces in the world had become invisible, not because of crime or controversy, but because he refused to stay quiet. In the years that followed, he turned toward independent films, using his own money to fund projects that mattered to him, stories about compassion, aging, and loss. His performances grew deeper, more personal, and less concerned with fame. Away from the spotlight, he became an advocate for humanitarian causes, finding purpose in the exile that Hollywood imposed. Richard Gere's legacy now stands as one of integrity and quiet defiance. He didn't lose his career to scandal, he lost it to principle. In an industry that preaches freedom but worships profit, that kind of courage is its own form of rebellion. He remains proof that being blacklisted for doing the right thing is, in the end, a badge of honor. 5. Ezra Miller. Ezra Miller was supposed to be the future of Hollywood, talented, bold, and unapologetically different. They broke through with the perks of being a wallflower, capturing a generation's fragility and defiance, then ascended to stardom as the Flash in the DC universe. Studios loved their fluid identity, their avant-garde energy, and the sense that Ezra represented something new, an artist who could redefine what a movie star looked like in the 21st century. But that image fractured as chaos took over. Beginning in the early 2020s, a storm of headlines followed: arrests in Hawaii, accusations of assault, strange outbursts, and disturbing reports about controlling behavior. What had once been eccentricity began to look like danger. Hollywood watched with unease as social media transformed Ezra's unraveling into daily spectacle. They had become unpredictable, and unpredictability is the one thing the industry fears more than failure. The fallout came swiftly. Warner Brothers paused. The Flash, their biggest superhero property, while executives scrambled to contain the damage. Behind the scenes, publicists vanished, meetings were canceled, and contracts rewritten. The studio system, once so proud to embrace Ezra's difference, now pretended not to know their name. There was no dramatic firing, just a suffocating silence that spoke louder than condemnation. Ezra retreated from the public eye, seeking treatment and vowing to take accountability for their actions. Whether that was enough remains uncertain. Hollywood loves redemption stories, but only when they come with box office guarantees. For now, Ezra's career floats in limbo, too famous to disappear completely, too tainted to fully return. Their story has become a mirror of modern celebrity, how fast admiration turns to disgust, and how quickly identity becomes weaponized once the narrative shifts. Ezra Miller's rise and fall reveal a truth that Hollywood never admits it loves individuality, but only when it behaves. 4. James Woods. James Woods was never the typical Hollywood star. He didn't have the smooth charm or plastic smile the system adored. He had something sharper. His performances in Salvador, Casino, and Videodrome burned with intelligence and danger. Woods brought a level of intensity that few actors could touch, and for decades, he was one of the most respected character actors in the business. His brilliance was undeniable, his presence unforgettable. But as Hollywood evolved, James Woods refused to play along. Outspoken, politically conservative, and unapologetically combative, he began using his platform to voice opinions that collided with the dominant ideology of the industry. In an environment where image means everything, his candor became costly. Casting directors stopped calling, his agency quietly dropped him, and studio invitations vanished. There was no public firing, no grand scandal, just a slow fade into silence. Woods himself later confirmed what everyone suspected. He had been blacklisted for his politics. "I'm not retiring," he said in an interview. "I've been retired by the left." His words carried both bitterness and pride, echoing the frustration of an artist who had built his career on honesty only to be punished for the same thing. Hollywood's version of free speech, he learned, had fine print. Away from the industry, Woods remained defiant. He withdrew to a quieter life, occasionally acting in small independent projects but mostly using social media as his stage. There, he continued to speak his mind, undiluted and unfiltered, a voice that refused to disappear even when the cameras stopped rolling. James Woods' legacy is one of paradox. A man whose intellect and talent earned him greatness, yet whose conviction cost him everything. In a world obsessed with tolerance, his story exposes the hypocrisy at its core, that Hollywood loves rebels only when they rebel in the right direction. His career may have been cut short, but his defiance ensures he will never be forgotten. 3. Alec Baldwin. Alec Baldwin has lived many lives in front of the camera: heartthrob, dramatic powerhouse, and comic genius. From The Hunt for Red October to 30 Rock, he built a career on versatility and confidence. His voice alone could command a room. His presence shaped every scene he entered. For decades, Baldwin was more than a performer. He was a symbol of Hollywood's old-school power, sharp, charming, and larger than life. Then, tragedy rewrote everything. In the autumn of 2021, while filming the Western Rust, a prop gun Baldwin handled discharged, killing cinematographer Helena Hutchins and wounding director Joel Souza. The world froze. The headlines blurred fact and blame, and overnight, Baldwin went from respected veteran to the center of one of Hollywood's darkest controversies. The backlash was instant and unforgiving. Lawsuits piled up, the media dissected every detail, and public opinion split between sympathy and outrage. He insisted the shooting was a tragic accident, that he never pulled the trigger, but the court of public perception had already chosen its villain. Networks distanced themselves, projects evaporated, and the laughter that once followed him on Saturday Night Live turned to uneasy silence. In the months that followed, Baldwin grew quieter. His interviews shifted from self-assurance to sorrow. The man who once embodied control now appeared fragile, haunted. He spoke of grief, responsibility, and survival, though no words could undo the image burned into public memory. For the first time in his career, his charisma failed to protect him. Alec Baldwin's story is no longer just about fame, it's about the unbearable weight of consequence. Whether he's guilty or not, his name will forever be linked to that fatal day. In Hollywood, redemption can be written into scripts, but in real life, some tragedies never fade. Baldwin remains a man suspended between greatness and guilt, carrying a burden no performance can erase. 2. Woody Allen. For half a century, Woody Allen stood as one of cinema's most distinctive voices, a writer, director, and actor whose neurotic humor and philosophical wit redefined American filmmaking. From Annie Hall to Manhattan and Midnight in Paris, he created entire worlds out of conversation, doubt, and longing. Critics hailed him as a genius. Actors begged to work with him. For decades, he was untouchable, the eccentric mastermind behind some of Hollywood's most celebrated art. But the man behind the masterpieces eventually became more infamous than his work. Long-standing allegations of sexual abuse resurfaced, and the conversation around him shifted from art to ethics. In the new era of accountability, his past became unbearable for many collaborators. Stars who once credited him for their success publicly denounced him, and studios fearing backlash began cutting ties. The very name Woody Allen became a liability. The reaction was swift and surgical. Amazon canceled his multi-picture deal, major distributors refused his new films, and festivals quietly stopped screening his work. His last American projects found no buyers. Without an official ban, he was nonetheless erased, another ghost in an industry eager to cleanse its conscience by burying its icons. Woody Allen moved his career overseas, finding audiences in Europe who still viewed him through the lens of artistry rather than outrage. There, he continued to make films with smaller budgets, surrounded by actors unafraid to be associated with his name. Yet even those projects carried the weight of controversy. No matter how charming or brilliant his storytelling remained, the shadow of accusation followed like a permanent watermark. His legacy is now a battlefield between art and morality, between those who separate the artist from his work and those who cannot. Woody Allen's story is not simply about guilt or innocence. It's about what happens when genius becomes unbearable to admire. In the end, his silence says as much as his words ever did, that even the brightest minds cannot outright their own ghosts. 1. Charlie Sheen. Charlie Sheen was once the unstoppable force of television. With a grin that could sell anything and timing that made every line unforgettable, he became a pop culture phenomenon through 2.5 Men. His charisma was electric, part charm, part danger, and audiences couldn't get enough. For years, he was the highest-paid actor on television, the face of Hollywood's most profitable sitcom, and the living embodiment of reckless success. But the same energy that made him a star also destroyed him. Sheen's off-screen life became a spectacle of addiction, violence, and chaos. His clashes with producers, public tirades, and self-destructive interviews filled with phrases like "tiger blood" and "winning" turned a working actor into a walking meme. What the public saw as entertainment, the studios saw as liability. In 2011, after months of turmoil, Warner Brothers fired him, effectively ending his reign. The fall was dramatic and very public. Sheen spiraled further, revealing his HIV diagnosis and blaming everyone but himself for his downfall. The tabloids circled like vultures, talk shows mocked him, even longtime friends kept their distance. For a while, it seemed he had become a caricature of his own excess, a man consumed by the fame he once mastered. Eventually, the chaos quieted. Years of sobriety and reflection softened the wild edges that once defined him. He began to speak candidly about his mistakes, addiction, and the illusion of control. Slowly, he found a way back into work, not as the king of television, but as a survivor trying to rebuild what he'd lost. Charlie Sheen's story is both a tragedy and a warning. He lived every dream, broke every rule, and paid every price. Hollywood made him a legend, then turned him into a punchline. Now, in his quiet redemption, he stands as the clearest proof that fame isn't freedom, it's just another kind of cage, one that only opens when the lights finally go out. Hollywood is a dream factory, one that builds gods out of mortals, then crushes them for the same humanity it once celebrated. Behind every red carpet and standing ovation lies a quiet cemetery of names, actors who spoke too freely, lived too wildly, or simply stopped fitting the narrative. The blacklist isn't always written sometimes. It's a silence, a look, a meeting that never happens. The stories of these 20 stars reveal the hidden heartbeat of the industry, a place where talent is currency, loyalty is temporary, and redemption is never guaranteed. Some fell because of scandal, others because of truth. A few fought back and found peace, others vanished, swallowed by the very spotlight that once adored them. But if there's one lesson buried beneath all the glitter, it's this: in Hollywood, fame is not immortality, it's a transaction. And the moment you stop being useful to the system, the lights go out, the cameras turn away, and the story moves on without you. Yet in the echoes of every fall from grace, there's something enduring, the reminder that art and truth are often born from the same kind of pain. These actors may have been silenced, erased, or forgotten, but in telling their stories, the illusion cracks, and for just a moment, we see the real Hollywood, brilliant, cruel, and heartbreakingly human.